You're listening to the planet's memory, where time breathes and the earth remembers. What if the first rain didn't fall to nourish, but to remember? It began not with thunder, but with a hush so vast it felt like the planet itself had drawn a long breath. Above, the sky was dim and swollen, not yet blue, only a soft molten grey, wrapped in vapour and drifting sun. And then it happened. The silence opened, and the first drop fell. It did not fall alone. 1,000 years of rain had begun, though no one would name it that. There were no eyes to watch, no ears to hear, only stone, only silence, only time. The drops fell like memory, not sharp, not sudden, but slow, rhythmic, unrelenting, as if the sky was trying to recall something it had almost forgotten. The earth had cooled just enough for oceans to whisper into clouds. Hydrogen met oxygen in the breath of newborn seas, lifted into the waiting arms of the sky, and released again, drop by drop as though returning home. Each raindrop struck with the softness of dust, but inside it carried heat, life, chemistry. They fell across basalt plains still steaming from their birth. They sizzled across volcanic glass and pooled in low places where gravity gathered dreams. This was not a storm, it was a remembering, the kind that has no need for lightning. The rain sculpted the earth's first sentences, carving lines into the crust, not to erase but to inscribe. Here the earliest minerals met water. For the first time, feldspar cracked, olivine wore smooth, iron began to bleed red into the world. Acids born of the rain began to dissolve the high places, calcium, magnesium. Elements of mountain bone washed down into the lowlands and settled in the silence. Layer by layer, these carried stories too, like a diary written in sediment. Rain moved not with violence, but with repetition. And repetition over time becomes memory. There was no life yet to witness these centuries, but already the stage was preparing its breath. In warm tidal hollows, amino chains stirred, fragile, experimental, unaware. Rain kissed them too, not with purpose, but with possibility. And so the world began to take shape beneath this endless weeping. Rivers etched their paths into ancient rock. Floodplains softened, canyons hinted. Even the wind seemed humbled by the sound of constant falling. In deep places, the water gathered warmth. Hydrothermal vents whispered minerals into the sea. Elsewhere, highlands groaned under the weight of soft erosion. Everything was shifting, not fast enough for the eye, but fast enough for the soul of a planet. We think of erosion as destruction, but what if it is something gentler, a kind of letting go? The rain taught the earth to forget its sharper edges, to round what was once jagged, to soften what was once still molten with birth, and the stones listened. Raindrops struck the same ridge for centuries. Not a single one made a difference, but together they remade the world. This is the language of patience. This is the grammar of time. Above, the sky never ceased. Clouds cycled and swelled, born from the breath of warming oceans, and still they let go. Perhaps they couldn't help it. Perhaps, in some way, the planet needed to cry itself into being, to weep long enough that something inside could finally grow. Even now, we find traces of this rain in the isotopic signatures of stone, ratios of deuterium to hydrogen, locked in ancient minerals, revealing temperatures, pressures, dreams. It's all still there, if you know where to listen. What we call the beginning was never one event. It was this long and quiet fall into shape. A fall so long, the planet nearly forgot it had once been fire. And yet, if this much can be forgotten, what else might still be dreaming beneath us? And still, the rain fell. From that ancient fall, the water gathered momentum, drawn not by destination, but by gravity's quiet invitation. It did not rush, it meandered, like thought unspoken, like memory returning from mountaintops worn by cloud tears. The rain threaded its way through every fracture, filling cracks in granite, smoothing over the old heat of the planet's bones. There were no names for these early rivers, only the soft logic of flow. They found their own way, not through conquest, but by listening. Beneath this drifting sky, the first rivers began to wander. Some slithered across open plains, wide and slow. Others cut deep, carving veins into the crust. Veins that shimmered with minerals that whispered of pressure and time. Granite surrendered. Flake by flake, shale peeled away like pages of a forgotten book, and the rivers read them all, slowly, faithfully, never in a hurry. Where the water moved, it carried pieces of what once was, silts, sands, dissolved ions, tiny memorials to vanished cliffs and mountain silence. These were the earth's first lines of poetry, written in runoff, smoothed in sediment. We do not know their names, but they were there. Thousands of them, braiding, splitting, disappearing. Some dried and returned to vapor, some seeped below, swallowed by the porous dark, and others became the ancestors of the rivers we know today. The Nile, the Anger, the Amazon. Their roots run deeper than we imagine, into strata never touched by sun, into epochs lost beneath the weight of time. And yet these early rivers had no need for permanence. They flowed not for glory, but simply because the land allowed it. They held no shape for long. They drifted, adjusted, meandered, like thoughts that change mid-sentence. In some places they carved lakes that would last for millennia before vanishing. In others, they sculpted canyons whose shadows would outlive entire climates. The continents, still young and restless, shifted beneath them. Tectonic plates moved like sleepwalkers, colliding, stretching, folding, and the rivers adjusted. They always did, even as mountain ranges rose like slow breaths from the mantle, even as basins collapsed and fault lines tore new wounds. The rivers remembered how to move, not in straight lines, but in the curved language of patience. Their edges birthed life before life had a name. Microbial mats clung to muddy shallows, filaments of early algae swayed in quiet eddies, and chemical dances began. The prelude to breath, to hunger, to self. The rivers were never just water. They were chemistry in motion, memory in liquid form, and perhaps they still are. Even now, when we trace the ghost paths of dry channels in desert stone, we see the echoes of their wandering. We see how water dreamed its way through the land, how it sculpted without hands, how it remembered without names. We forget how much of the earth was written this way, not in fire, but in flow. These were not just rivers, they were the planet, thinking slowly through movement, through erosion, through change. And though their names are lost, their marks remain, carved into canyon walls, folded into metamorphic seams, dissolved into aquifers below our feet. And yet, if even the rivers can be forgotten, what else might still be wandering beneath the skin of the world? And though the rivers wandered nameless, they left behind still places, lakes, floodplains, swamps thick with breath and decay, where time could deepen and sediment could settle. From those quiet banks, the rain continued to fall, not as a torrent now, but as a hush, a slow and steady descent that blurred the line between sky and earth. And in this quiet world, life began to linger. Simple bodies, soft, gelatinous, delicate, drifted in the warmth of shallow pools. They pulsed, they floated, some anchored to nothing, some crawling blindly through microbial mats. They had no bones, no teeth, no armor to endure the centuries, and still, some of them remained. The rain helped seal their fates, each drop pressing down the mud, softening the edges of the present so that memory could harden into stone. It did not happen all at once. First a creature fell still, beneath a blanket of silt, stirred up by the rain-fed current. Then, buried deeper with every flood, its body began to dissolve, but left an outline, a trace, a shadow in the sediment. Time, in its patience, replaced what once was soft with minerals drawn from water. Calcite, pyrite, silica, the living turned into rock without ever meaning to. And so the first fossils were formed, not as monuments, but as accidents of timing and place. Some were mere impressions, pressed like thoughts into clay. Others, more fortunate, were entombed whole, encased in nodules or caught in the folds of a collapsing delta. In the Burgess Seas, in Ediacaran shallows, in Cambrian bloom and Ordovician drift, soft life was given permanence by the quiet collaboration of rain and mud. It is easy to forget how unlikely fossils are, how rare, how precious. For every 1,000 lives lived, perhaps one left a mark, and even that mark could be shattered by pressure, crushed by the folding of continents, dissolved by the chemistry of groundwater, and yet some endured. We find them now in cliffs split by wind, in roadside cuts and quarry shelves, in stones we once thought plain, trilobites curled in sleep, feathered shadows in shale, leaf veins fossilized in iron oxide, each one a whisper sealed beneath a raindrop, each one a breath that didn't vanish. Even the rainwater left its own traces in concretions that bloomed like geologic roses, in ripple marks preserved where ancient ponds once blinked in and out of being. And here, among these fragments, science and wonder meet. We can read isotopes in the fossil bones, ratios that tell us the temperature of the sea, the salinity of the lake, the diet of the creature. We can measure decay, we can date extinction, we can map the memory, but numbers do not capture the hush that settled over the mud when something slipped beneath it, still warm, still full of potential before the earth claimed it forever. There is poetry in the way the past forgets us slowly, in how even flesh can linger, if the rain is right, if the silt is deep, if time allows. And yet not all fossils were born in silence. Some were caught mid-flight, like the Archaeopteryx, a moment of feathers and fall immortalized by luck. Others were frozen in violence, teeth locked in prey, skeletons twisted by panic, the sudden burial of entire shoals beneath collapsing dunes or volcanic ash. But most were quiet. A jellyfish pressed into lime, a leaf caught in the drift, a fish settled on the seafloor, ribs rising once, then never again. We walk on their memories. We build our cities on sediment layered with unspoken lives. They do not speak, but they are not silent. They remind us that life is fragile, but memory, under the right conditions, can harden into permanence. And when the rain returns, as it always does, it wears away the stone again. It reveals what has slept. Bones shimmer under the mud, shells crack the surface, and the earth tells its story once more. And yet, if the softest bodies can survive 1 billion years, what else might still be breathing beneath the next layer of stone? And still the bones slept, buried beneath silt and silence, their outlines held in stone like pressed leaves in ash. Above them the sky darkened again. The same sky, older now, heavier, where once it had spilled rain with the innocence of breath, now it wept with something deeper, a learned ache, a sorrow it couldn't name. The clouds, swollen with memory, rolled low over the landscape, not in rage but in mourning. They passed above forests, slowly dying, their roots drowned in soils too soft, their trunks leaning with the weight of too much water and too little light. What once was lush and stretching upward began to sag, rot, fall. Leaf by leaf the canopy thinned, moss overtook bark, fungi bloomed in the dark, and the rain it kept falling, not to feed, but to grieve. It carved rivulets into the hillsides, turning green slopes to grey scars. It pooled where rivers used to run, flooded where animals once fed. Whole plains grew quiet, sunken, their names, if they ever had them, lost beneath a whispering tide of decay, but memory never truly ended there. It lingered in the way the rain changed, no longer soft and uncertain. The storms came with rhythm now, with knowing. They moved across the land like a ritual, 1,000 years of weather, each drop shaped by the erosion it left behind, and erosion, slow and patient, began to sculpt something strange. Valleys opened like wounds, cliffs crumbled into canyons, and the bones of earlier worlds rose again to meet the sky. What the earth had buried, the sky began to unearth, not all at once, but piece by piece, as though grief needed time to become beauty. We think of the atmosphere as above us, as separate, but the truth is, the sky and the ground have always been in conversation. Through rain, through pressure, through time, as carbon dioxide ebbed and flowed, as methane lingered or faded, the sky changed shape, and in response, so did the earth. More rain meant more erosion meant more exposure, and more exposure meant a deeper knowing. The rocks, once silent, now spoke of what they had endured. Their surfaces shimmered with oxidation. Iron turned red with the breath of the sky. Limestones dissolved beneath the tears of clouds. And in each weathered surface, a story was etched. This was the grief of a planet, not loud, but constant. And like all grief, it hollowed out space for something new to take shape. The sun broke through less often, but when it did, it lit steam rising from cracked soil. It shimmered on water collected in the ribs of old creatures. It turned floodwater into mirrors, and in those mirrors the sky saw itself older, yes, but also wiser, for grief is not the end of memory. It is memory held long enough to change us. And so the sky, having learnt the weight of erosion, began to carry it differently. The storms came with softer voices, the winds slowed, and in the hush between rainfall, seeds stirred in the mud. Not many, but enough. Enough to remind the sky that even sorrow can feed the soil. And yet, if the sky itself can learn to grieve, what else might it still carry beneath its ever-changing face? And yet, if the sky itself could learn to grieve, the earth too would respond. Not in words, but in unveiling. It began slowly, as all changes do when shaped by water. The same rain that once buried the soft pulsing life of oceans and forests now returned, not as erasure, but as light, floodlight. Not from the sun alone, but from the gleam of bone beneath the surface, finally meeting the open air. Thin rivers, carved into the softened crust, peeled back layers of time. In their shallow beds the stones shifted, not enough to collapse, just enough to reveal, and there, resting where no eyes had seen for eons, lay the remains of creatures who had once breathed under different skies. The bones did not speak, but they shimmered, washed clean by centuries of erosion, polished by sediments and silence. They did not return all at once. Instead, the planet unveiled them like memories half remembered in dreams. A ribcage curled beneath a limestone shelf, a mandible cradled in clay, delicate vertebrae held in silt like beads on an unseen thread. Some had belonged to giants, others to the fragile, but all had been shaped by breath, by movement, by some desire to live. Now they were still, and the rivers carried their stories forward. Each bone held its own chemistry, traces of calcium, phosphorus, even the rarest isotopes preserved like ancient handwriting. Paleontologists would one day read these signatures, decoding temperature, habitat, diet, even migration, but long before the eye of science, the eye of the world had already remembered them. The land had kept its dead not out of fear, but out of rhythm. To erode is not to forget. It is to allow something deeper to be seen. And the rain never hurried, never cruel, had waited for just the right moment to peel back the stone. In floodplains where rivers braided and unwound, in canyons where runoff deepened the scars, in exposed hills where soil had thinned to transparency, bones began to rise. They gleamed beneath twilight, lit by the sheen of fresh rainwater, pooling in hollow sockets, gathering in the curved plates of skulls. And still, they said nothing. But silence can teach. We learn that not all extinction is erasure. Some is memory carved into the crust. The earth, so often imagined as destroyer, is also an archivist, a slow librarian of flesh. She keeps what matters, not by choice, but by gravity, by chemistry, by the rhythm of loss. Some fossils were left whole, others shattered, scattered, as if even in death, some creatures could not stay still. And there, among the skeletal debris, we see patterns, not just anatomy, but position, proximity, emotion. Were these herds caught mid-migration? Were they families huddled in the rising mud? Were they alone? The bones don't say, but we wonder. Even now, in deserts and cliffs, bones gleam after rainfall. They catch the light like messages in bottles, sent forward by erosion, opened by chance. We are not the first to find them, but we may be the first to ask, were these remains meant to be seen, or are we interrupting something sacred, a dream the earth was still dreaming? Because beneath every bone lies another. Time stacks its secrets, rain sorts them, and rivers carry the most recent into our hands. But the oldest ones, they are still waiting, far below, beneath the tectonic hum. Bones not yet fossilized sleep in quiet darkness, held in sediment, not yet ready to part. The floodlight will reach them too. One day, when the river bends again, when the cliff slumps just right, when the rain finds its angle. And yet, if even bones can return to the surface, what else might still be rising, just beneath the next layer of light? And if the bones could rise from floodlight and silence, then surely the mountains too could begin to remember. For long before rivers wandered, before forests thickened and fossilized, there were only the ridges, vast, raw, sleeping under the breath of stars. They were never silent, only still, raised by the slow collision of plates, scarred by ancient upheaval. They had once touched the sky and tasted the sea in the same breath. Salt once lapped against their flank. Corals clung to their lower slopes, and in the hush of deep time, fish swam where hikers now walk. The mountains held this within them, a record of oceans long gone, pressed into limestone, layered with the ghosts of tides. But memory, even in stone, is fragile, and so the rain returned, not to conquer, but to remind. Each droplet struck with quiet intent, etching channels into the peaks, carving away grains of quartz, washing feldspar down into waiting valleys. To stand upon a mountain is to stand upon movement, frozen only for a moment. Even the hardest ridge is soft when seen across the clock of 1,000,000 years. The rain knew this, the rain remembered. And so, sediment by sediment, the peaks let go of what they'd once held, bits of ancient reef trapped within metamorphic folds, loosened, shale softened, granite cracked along seams where water had whispered for centuries. And with every storm, the mountains grew smaller, not weaker, just older. We think of mountains as timeless, but they are the most temporary of Earth's features. Born in violence, eroded in sleep, within their roots we find clues of vanished continents, zircon crystals, older than oceans, isotopes that tell us of atmospheric shifts, oxygen rising, carbon falling. The mountain's memory is not held in surface alone, but in chemistry, in structure, in the angles of uplift and fold. Even the rain carries that memory away. It does not destroy it, it delivers it. Each washed away grain becomes part of something else. A delta far below, a dune in a drying plain, a seabed forming again in a younger world. And so memory flows, from high to low, from jagged to smooth. Sometimes in the right light, you can see where glaciers once carved paths through these peaks. U-shaped valleys, grooves etched into bedrock, rocks scratched by the passing of ice and pressure. Even the glaciers were messengers, They took pieces of mountain and scattered them across the plains, erratic stones where they don't belong, like thoughts misplaced but never lost. And the mountains, patient as always, let them go. They understood to endure is not to resist erosion, but to release what is no longer needed. From every peak, a story ran downward, in meltwater, in landslides, in trickles that became torrents. And when those sediments reached the sea, they settled again, layer upon layer, flattened by time, compressed into stone, stone that would one day rise again, pushed upward by tectonic dreams, forming a new ridge, a new memory, because the earth does not forget. It recycles, and in that recycling, memory becomes more than history. It becomes inheritance. The mountain's memory is not lost. It is simply passed along into the soil we walk, into the clay we mold, into the dust we breathe, and still the rain comes, patient and faithful, tracing the contours of what remains. It doesn't rush the forgetting, it honors it. And yet, if the tallest stones can remember the touch of sea, what else might still be echoing within the folds beneath our feet? And if the mountains remembered in descent, the ocean remembered in depth, for all that the rain carried down the minerals, the bones, the silt of vanished forests, it brought to the sea a quiet offering, a slow return. There, beneath the grey horizon, the sky's long weeping was swallowed whole. No thunder now, only the hush of currents, the rhythm of tides shaped by distant pulls, and beneath that surface, stillness, not silence, but a denser kind of listening. Layer by layer, the ocean received the stories of the land. Rivers emptied their secrets. Glacial melt spilled with the memory of stone. Even wind-borne dust found its place, falling like faded ash into an endless blue cradle. And the ocean, vast and unspeaking, held it all. Its memory ran backward, not in time, but in pressure. The deeper you went, the older the water, the colder, the slower. In the abyssal plains, where no light reached, sediments settled like breath held for millennia. Each flake of organic matter, each grain of powdered mountain, fell through columns of darkness, and came to rest in a slow, delicate snow that never melted. This marine snowfall wrote a history more patient than parchment. Carbon from leaves, shells of plankton, fragments of meteor dust, all collected, all remembered. The sea did not forget what the sky had cried. In chemical ratios, it kept a ledger. Oxygen isotopes shifted with the ice ages. Carbon levels marked mass extinctions. Heavy metals whispered of distant volcanoes, or the breath of burning forests. To read the seafloor is to read the rain. Every storm that ever passed, every drought that ever broke, left a trace in the layering of salt and silt. And sometimes, just sometimes, life found a way to fossilize even there. Not with bones, but with absence. Burrows in mud, left by creatures that wriggled and vanished. Teeth scattered among nodules. Skeletons of whales collapsed gently on the deep seabed, their hollow frames becoming reefs for microbes and sediment alike. The ocean did not rush this memory. It held it with pressure and weight and silence. What began as vapor returned to darkness, and yet, even in this abyss, there was movement. Currents looped like veins. Upwellings drew ancient water to the surface, where it mingled with the sky again, transformed but still marked. Rain that once carved ridges became part of tides that kissed new shores. Water that once flooded forests now drifted in spirals through coral reefs, carrying traces of extinction and rebirth. The ocean cycles itself slowly, deliberately. It may take 1,000 years for a droplet to complete its journey through the deep. And in that time, what does it remember? Perhaps it carries the taste of a long-lost continent, or the temperature of a sun not yet discovered, or the sorrow of a sky that once let go of everything. But not all memory is heavy. Some is buoyant. The sea, for all its darkness, holds wonder too. Bioluminescent creatures spark beneath pressure. Hydrothermal vents bloom with unseen life, and the soft hum of tectonic rift zones reminds us that even here the earth breathes, and so the ocean listens backward and forward, holding what the world has shed, what the rain has carried, what time has softened. The continents forget, the mountains dissolve, but the sea remembers in its depth, and we float upon that memory, unaware of how much came before us, how much is still below us. And yet, if even the ocean can carry grief for 1,000 years, what else might be flowing beneath us, waiting to rise again in the next storm? And from the sea's deep memory, the rain returned again, this time to the forgotten places, to the spaces once shaped by hands. But the hands were gone. Only the bones of structure remained, half buried in wet soil, veiled beneath vines, and sunk into the silence where names once echoed. It was a storm without witness. But the earth was still watching. The clouds swelled above lands that maps no longer claimed. Raindrops thickened. Thunder rolled like a drum too distant to fear. And then lightning, it stitched across the sky. Veins of white fire, unraveling into the dark, each flash revealing more than shadow could conceal. Stone arches, worn steps, a courtyard lined with columns slumped like old thoughts. They emerged for only a moment, caught in the brief theatre of light, then returned to the hush of rain. These were cities no one remembered, not because they were small, but because they had fallen too slowly to mourn, layer by layer. Mud had risen, floods had come and gone, plants had reached and curled, pulled down walls and crumbled rooftops until the ruins became a kind of forest themselves. But stone speaks in weight, and the rain knew how to listen. Each droplet washed dust from carvings that no language could decipher, symbols etched in basalt, faces worn smooth by centuries of storms. Were they gods? Were they ancestors? Were they only echoes of imagination? We cannot say, and yet they remained. Not all cities are built to last, but some fall so slowly. They become part of the Earth's own dream. This was one of them, or many, scattered across floodplains and buried beneath deltas. They lay beneath feet that had forgotten them, beneath rivers that once fed them, now devouring the memory of their own source. The rain moved across this landscape with neither reverence nor ruin. It simply continued, pooling in collapsed cisterns, tracing the seams of old aqueducts, filling sunken courtyards where no voices gathered anymore. And in the lightning's rhythm the city flickered, as though remembering itself. Ruins are not absence. They are transition, a slow conversation between creation and return. The walls, though broken, still held warmth beneath the moss. The stones, though silent, still hummed when struck by thunder. Perhaps these cities were not so lost as we believe. Perhaps they were only resting beneath the veil of growth and forgetting. Geology tells us that entire civilizations can vanish under 10 meters of mud in less than a century. Volcanic ash, river shifts, seismic sighs from beneath the crust, and when they disappear, the earth does not mourn loudly. It folds them into sediment, tucks them between layers of clay and moves on. But in the right storm, a corner may be revealed, a single stair, a doorway filled with roots, and lightning. Lightning sees everything for a moment. In that flicker, what was built returns. The rain, like breath, soaks each surface, tracing forgotten hands, rekindling the weight of human hope pressed into stone. We may never know who lived here, what songs they sang, what gods they called when the floods came, but we can still feel the echo of shelter, the outline of purpose, the weight of time, folded into design. And when the storm passes, when the water retreats, the city disappears once more, not gone, only sleeping. And yet, if even forgotten cities can surface between storms, what else might be waiting, just beneath the rain's reflection and beneath the rain-soaked ruins? As the last echoes of lightning dimmed across broken walls, the ground whispered of stranger things. Time had not kept its ledger clean. It had folded memories together, life forms and languages, corals and columns, fossils and wires, pressed into the same sediment as if the past did not mind who arrived first. The rain still falling seeped into this collage. It touched trilobites curled in ancient rest, their exoskeletons shining faintly in the clay. It kissed ammonite spirals, frozen in the geometry of extinction, and just beside them, metal, not ore, but shaped alloy, corroded, angular, fragments of circuitry laced with rust, a bolt threaded through bone, a plate fused into fossil, a shard of glass melted around the root of a tooth that had not grown in 10,000 years. The rain paused as if uncertain. Was this memory or accident? The earth had not separated its stories cleanly. Everything that fell to it became part of the same memory, and so when the structures crumbled, when the towers collapsed, when the roads split and the engines stilled, they too returned to the ground. And the ground, without judgment, kept them. Now they were buried beside ferns, beside shells, beside footprints hardened in volcanic ash and fiber optic strands, fossilized in silicate bloom. We call them technofossils, artifacts of industry, fused into stone by pressure and time, plastic threads in glacial ice, batteries flattened beneath shale, satellites shattered into the desert, and slowly buried by dune and dust. It was all there, a different kind of extinction, and the rain, as it always did, washed over both. It could not choose between them, between the coral and the circuit board, between the vertebrae and the motherboard. To the water, all memory was mineral, and so it flowed through subway tunnels, turned aquifers, over circuit traces etched in gold, through cave walls that hummed faintly from what still tried to power on. There are records in the rock, and not all of them were meant to last. Digital decay moves faster than bone, magnetism fades, ink dissolves, code vanishes into unreadable fragments. But the shape of intention, the arrangement of matter with purpose that lingers, and sometimes it fuses with things much older, a mollusk shell drilled by acid rain, now nested with copper wire, a skull fossilized beside a shattered lens, glassware melted into the fossil bed of a reef lost long before language. We often imagine layers, prehistoric beneath modern, but the earth does not stack so cleanly. Tectonics twist, floods reorder, ash buries progress, and sometimes what we made yesterday ends up lying beneath what was grown a million years before. It is all sediment, now, all story, and the rain is the reader. It moves across these layers with the same tenderness it gave to forests, to mountains, to ancient lakes. It finds no conflict in discovering a silicon chip beside a trilobite, no confusion in rust blooming beside calcite, only continuation, only the quiet blending of memory and matter. And so we begin to see, perhaps we were never apart from the fossil record, perhaps we were always meant to become part of it. Our machines, our buildings, our plastic and glass, they are not above nature. They are merely newer entries in a very long book, one that the rain is still writing. Even now, acid falls from sky to soil, altering the pH of memory. Circuits dissolve, shells grow thinner, and the line between biology and technology softens with every storm. One day, far from now, something will split a rock and find both ammonite and antenna, and they will wonder which came first. And yet, if even our machines become memory, what else might the earth be folding into stone, right now, without our knowing? And if even circuits could lie beside shells, weathered equally by rain and time, then perhaps nothing, not even identity, could escape erosion. The cliffs knew this. They had once been mountains, then plateaus, then broken ledges where seabirds rested in salt wind. Now they were simply edges, unfolding into the sea. Every grain that tumbled from their flanks was a piece of what had once been whole. And still, the rain fell, not to wound, but to remind. Each droplet sanded the stone gently, rhythmically, as if polishing away not just matter, But memory, it happens slowly, the kind of slow that only the earth understands. So slow the cliff still felt solid, still permanent, but grain by grain, what it had once been became something else. And beneath the rain, so did we. We too are made of layers, moments sedimented into a self, childhood ridges, adolescent valleys, plateaus of certainty, fault lines of change. And over time, those too wear down. The things we swore we'd never forget dissolve into soft recollection. The edges of experience round off into story, the sharpness of emotion smoothed into quiet, knowing erosion does not only shape rock, it softens the mind, the soul. There is a cliff within each of us, made of choices, of names we no longer answer to, of echoes that once felt like truth, and like the coast we let them fall away, not in mourning, but in release. The rain never asks permission, it simply arrives, and we, like the stone, must learn to let go, to allow each drop to carry some forgotten fragment out to sea. We think of forgetting as failure, but in nature it is often necessity. When the cliff collapses, the sea floor gains. When the canyon deepens, the river breathes easier. To lose part of yourself is not to vanish, but to return to something more fluid, more present. Erosion makes presence possible. A rock may begin as jagged, but in time, in tide, it becomes round, warm in the palm, ready to be held. So too with the self. We begin with edges, sharp opinions, hard borders, certainties that chisel who we think we are. But time and experience, those patient waters, they soften until one day we are smooth enough to be touched without cutting, to be carried without weight. This is not loss, it is transformation. The cliffs never rage as they fall, they simply rejoin the sand from which they rose, and in doing so, become part of something larger. We too return to the silence between identities, to the breath beneath belief, to the stillness of simply being. Presence is what remains when memory no longer holds shape. It is the echo without the voice, the stone without the monument. And yet, within that simplicity, a kind of clarity, the rain does not mourn the cliff. It moves through its absence with ease, and the cliff in its slow surrender becomes shoreline, becomes seabed, becomes part of every wave that follows. And so do we. In letting go, we spread. In forgetting, we become more than the memory. We become the space in which something new might form. And yet, if even the self can erode into stillness, what truths might lie hidden beneath what we no longer remember? And beneath the erosion of self, where identity slipped like sandstone into surf, something deeper began to stir, a truth not carved but unmade. It was still raining, always raining, but not as before. This rain didn't sharpen outlines or reveal bones. It unstitched things, quietly, completely. The world had begun to fray, not in chaos, but in soft unravelling. Walls became seeped with water. Books blurred at the edges, structures once firm in shape grew uncertain, sagging beneath the constant drip of time. Entropy had arrived, not as a storm, but as a steady descent. It didn't come to destroy. It came to even the field, to loosen, to equalize, to return all things to their simplest form. And it chose the rain as its whisper. For every system, no matter how intricate, no matter how deliberate, will drift toward dissolution if given enough time. And time is generous. Molecules drift apart, connections weaken, the heat of creation fades into the chill of equilibrium. Even the most sacred shapes, the spiral of a fern, the curve of a cathedral, the spin of a galaxy, must one day surrender their symmetry. In every stone building left to weather, you see it, the crumbling of corners, the vines taking root in cracks, the roof bowing beneath rain's steady weight. Not violence, only return. Entropy is not the enemy of life. It is its companion. Without decay, there is no space for renewal. Without softening, no way to reshape. And the rain, faithful, infinite, is entropy's patient sculptor. It dissolves salt domes into subterranean rivers. It breaks down mortar into grit. It smooths the edges of cities until only their outlines remain, like shadows of memory on fog. And beyond the material, it reaches thought. Ideas once held rigid begin to shift. Certainties dissolve. Old truths become questions. Questions become silence. Even the mind weathers. Beliefs erode. And the spaces between them widen into wonder. Entropy falls like rain because it touches everything gently. Inevitably, it is the path from order to openness. The raindrop does not ask what it is softening. It simply falls onto steel, onto soil, onto the outstretched leaves of a dying tree. And with each fall, it carries energy outward, spreading warmth into cold, structure into soup, form into formless. We fight this. Sometimes we build monuments, preserve data, carve names into stone as if permanence were proof against forgetting. But even the most enduring archive is a temporary breath in a breathing planet. Even hard drives rust. Even stone yields. Even language loses its shape in time's long mouth. And yet there is peace in this, because if all things must soften, then nothing is ever truly broken, only shifting, only passing through a season of surrender. What crumbles feeds the soil, what fades makes space for light. Entropy does not erase meaning, it reveals the core beneath it. It is the quiet pull toward equilibrium, the evening of heat, the spreading of colour, the flattening of contrast, not an end, a diffusion, and all around us it falls, in drops, in the hush of twilight rain across abandoned fields. Entropy, like the rain, asks nothing. It only reminds that to hold forever is to resist the nature of the world, that surrender is not always loss. Sometimes it is the way home, and yet, if even the laws of form bow to the rain, what truths might emerge when everything at last lets go? And if even form could dissolve under the hush of entropy, then the rain too would find new paths to fall, not down mountainsides or across river plains, but into the dark, into the earth itself. Here in chambers never touched by sunlight, storms continued in silence, not storms of wind or thunder, but of mineral pressure and time, a different kind of rain, one that dripped with memory, slow as breath in sleep. Caves do not forget the sky, they carry it inward, secretly, carving cathedrals beneath our feet. Each droplet that slips through limestone, through fissures in ancient strata, arrives transformed. It brings with it the ghost of surface storms, acids dissolved from fallen leaves, trace gases breathed by vanished forests, particles carried in the slipstream of history. It falls, not with force, but with rhythm, a slow tap, a soft note, and where it lands, a stalactite begins. Formed not in haste, but in echo, millimetre by millimetre, stone grows downward from the cave ceiling, capturing the chemistry of rain layer by translucent layer, and beneath it, a stalagmite rises in reply. The two speak in drips, in centuries, in a language older than language. These are the cave songs, hymns carved by water, recorded not in sound but in form. You can read them. If you listen with your eyes, isotopes of oxygen and carbon embedded in each mineral ring, whisper of past climates. Were the rains warm? Was the air thick with ash? Did sunlight break through the clouds of an old extinction? The speleothems, those cave-born spires, answer without voice. They show us droughts that lasted lifetimes, deluges that followed fire, centuries when the forest flourished above, and others when it withered. The cave remembers it all, and in this remembering we are humbled, because even as entropy softens the surface, the underground holds firm, not resisting change, but documenting it, not preventing decay, but measuring its music. Drip by drip, a vault of history is written in stone, no ink, no paper, only time and the storm above. It may roar, it may tear leaves from trees and flood cities, but down here it becomes a note in a growing harmony. The earth is not hollow, it is humming. Caves carry the vibration of rain long after it has ceased. They echo the drip of water that began its descent hundreds of days ago through soil, through rock, through veins of mineral and air. What emerges is not just water, but transformed memory, filtered, concentrated, distilled, and that memory doesn't just build columns. It creates life. Tiny organisms thrive in these dark waters, feeding on iron, on sulfur, on secrets. They live without sunlight, evolved to read the world by touch, by chemistry, by patience. Even life here learns to grow by listening. And so these caves, quiet, hidden, reverent, are not empty. They are listening rooms, concert halls for the planet's slowest symphony. And we are rarely invited in. But when we are, when the torchlight catches the gleam of a hanging spire, when the sound of a single drop echoes louder than thought, we remember that the earth speaks beneath us, just as it does above, that not all storms are seen. Some are etched, layered, stacked beneath the surface until they rise like song. And yet, if even caves sing of forgotten rain, what else might be echoing in the hollow places we've never reached? And if the caves could sing of forgotten rain, then surely the forests, those ancient lungs of the world, must still be dreaming beneath the flood. They had once reached skyward, branches lifted into stormlight, leaves trembling under the gentle weight of falling rain. But time does not always leave things standing. One day the rains grew heavier, the rivers swelled beyond their beds. The soil softened, and the forest floor vanished beneath rising waters, not with violence, but with weight, with patience. What followed was a burial, slow and silent. The trees did not rot. They transformed, layered in ash, in silt, in the quiet press of time. They began to change from breath to stone. Roots turned to quartz. Trunks hardened into agate. Even fallen leaves, delicate as breath, left behind their impression in mineral form. It was a kind of sleep, not death, but preservation, geological sleep, deep, still, unbroken. And so the forest remained, not in soil but in stone, each tree standing in stillness beneath layers of hardened earth, its rings no longer made of cellulose, but of crystallized memory. We call them petrified forests, but they are more than that. They are fossils of presence, of pause, of the moment just before disappearing. Rain once kissed these trees, now stone cradles their ghosts. Even the smallest details were held, knot and grain, bark and hollow. Some trees fell mid-collapse, others stood straight, as if still listening for thunder, and all around them, the flood hardened, sands shifted, clays compressed, volcanic ash mingled with groundwater, and time wrapped the forest in its quiet hold. Millions of years passed, continents drifted, climates shifted, new forests rose and fell above. But below these trees slept, and then erosion began again. Wind lifted dust, rains carved valleys, and stone gave way, revealing trunks that shimmered with the sheen of crystal, as if the forest had awoken beneath starlight. Today we find them standing where no forest grows, in deserts, on ridges, in places where rain has long forgotten how to fall, and yet they remain. Stone logs split clean through the middle, showing rings of red and gold, tree roots, tracing downward into rock, as if still seeking water. This is the paradox of time. What once was softest, the living, breathing tree, becomes the hardest memory of all. Fossilized wood tells us more than age. It tells us chemistry. The elements of ancient soil, the minerals of groundwater, the volcanic history of the land. Each tree becomes a timeline, a chapter pressed in stone, and though they no longer sway in wind, they still hold motion in the way their branches fell, in the arcs of their collapse. The forest, though stilled, has not been silenced. It speaks through crystal, through the shine of chalcedony, through roots that gleam like glass beneath our feet. We walk through it now as visitors, not intruders but readers, because the forest was not lost, only translated. What once grew toward the sky now grows into memory, and the rain, though long gone, was the beginning. It softened the ground, it fed the soil, it blurred the edges until transformation could begin, and in that blurring, something eternal took root. Stone trees, still standing, still remembering what it meant to rise. And yet, if even forests can turn to crystal in their sleep, what else might be waiting beneath the floodwaters of time, ready to shine again? And beneath the crystal trunks of petrified trees, beneath the shimmer of stone forests in permanent bloom, the rain for a time ceased. Not all memory flows. Some dries, cracks, fades beneath a sun too bright to hold. Between rains came the droughts, long seasons of silence, where the sky offered nothing, and the earth opened in thirst. Where once there had been rivers, there were only beds of baked clay. The soil, once rich and loamy, split apart, as if trying to breathe without water, and in the absence, dust rose, fine, weightless, unclaimed. It curled along the ground in serpent trails. It hung in the air like forgotten words. It gathered in corners where shadow endured. This was not the dust of new decay, but of the long unremembered, the broken remnants of lives never carved in stone, never written into record. The wind carried them anyway, crumbled bones of creatures too small for notice, powdered remains of cultures without monuments, ashes of languages that vanished before they were etched into clay. They were not erased, they simply scattered across deserts that once were oceans, over plateaus that once held songs, into canyons where no one listens anymore. Even in this, the earth continued its memory, not through fossils, but through presence, because dust does not forget. It carries the chemical echoes of everything it once was, calcium from bone, phosphorus from breath, carbon from the heart of things, and still the wind moved it, not with purpose, but with rhythm, carrying it across continents, through ancient passes, into the open mouths of glaciers and the empty cradles of riverbeds. It settled in layers, thin as time, on ledges no one climbed, in valleys too dry to bloom, and with each passing drought, a little more was lost. But loss in this case was not silence, it was diffusion. The self no longer held in a single form, but shared, scattered into the breath of the world. In deserts you can still feel it, a kind of whisper underfoot, a hush in the wind's movement, as if the air itself carries sorrow for what never became memory. There were those who rose and lived without record, who built without metal, spoke without script, loved without permanence. And when the drought came, they vanished, not in fire, not in flood, but in dust. Their names uncarved, their stories unrecalled, their legacy born only in the particles lifted by wind and laid down again in places they never knew. Some call them forgotten, but the earth does not use that word. The earth calls them dispersed, because even dust can be meaningful. In lost plains, the finest particles form fertile soil. In glacier cores, dust layers tell us of long-gone droughts and distant fires. In our lungs, dust reminds us that we are always breathing what once was. The unremembered do not vanish. They become part of everything. A mountain's shadow, a desert's shimmer, a breath taken beside an open window after a dry wind. Even the rain remembers them. When it returns, it catches dust in its descent, pulling it back to the ground, pressing it into new soil, into seed beds, into the cracks of sleeping forests, and from that dust new life may rise, not as tribute, but as continuation, because the world is built on more than what we choose to write down. And yet, if even the wind carries the unnamed, what else might still be drifting just beyond the edges of memory, waiting for rain to fall again, and beyond the drifting dust of the unremembered, where silence lingered over dry riverbeds and scattered names, the sky shuddered. This was no gentle sorrow, no soft erosion or silent forgetting. This was rupture, because the earth too remembers in fire. There came a time, and many times like it, when the clouds, heavy with ash and heat, no longer whispered, but burned. The planets stirred from below, the mantle sighed, and volcanoes bloomed with darkness. Not the darkness of night, but of ash so thick it turned day to ember, of thunder without rain, of lightning born not from storm, but from friction in the choking breath of eruption. The clouds tasted fire, and when the rain finally came, it did not cleanse, it seethed, acidic, scalding, infused with sulphur and silence. Droplets hissed as they struck stone, evaporating on contact, etching black glass across fields of ash. This was rain that bore witness, not to life, but to endings. Forests wilted beneath it. Rivers turned to steam. Creatures fled or fell, some fossilized in postures of panic, curled beneath a sun they could no longer see. And in the aftermath, a layer of soot, a black line in the geological record, thin, distinct, unblinking, a signature of extinction. We find it now pressed between layers of shale and limestone, as if the earth marked its own page with a stroke of fire. In those lines we read cataclysm, mass extinctions seeded by sky-darkening eruptions, like the Siberian traps or Deccan flood basalts, unfolding not in moments but in centuries of ash and acid rain. This was not one event, it was many, repeated, scattered, remembered, the planet reshaping itself through heat and collapse. The atmosphere, once a medium for gentle rain, became a crucible. Clouds formed not from ocean vapor, but from gases ejected into the stratosphere. Sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, shadows made chemical, and lightning, always present, took on a different hue. It flashed not with brilliance, but with mourning. It laced across skies so thick with debris that stars could not be seen for years, and when the sun returned, it cast light across a changed world. Where there had been forests, now stood fields of pumice. Where herds had once moved, now silence reigned. And still, the earth continued, because fire is not only destruction, it is transformation. Volcanic soils, once cooled, grew green again. Islands rose from lava, craters filled with water, and life, always life, began its quiet work of return. But the rain remembered. In every droplet that fell after, there lingered the memory of fire, of clouds turned caustic, of light that broke not the dark but the pattern. Even today, we find evidence, isotopes shifted in ancient sediments, tree rings stripped of growth, ice cores marbled with trapped aerosols from eruptions no human ever saw. The earth wrote it all down, in chemistry, in silence, in stone. Because the rain is not always gentle. Sometimes it comes carrying endings, but even endings held long enough become seeds, and so we remember that not all light is hope. Some light scars, some heat wounds, some rain stings the skin and boils the leaf. Still the sky heals, it forgets, in the way that all wounds forget, not by erasing but by growing around the loss. The clouds, once scorched, return to softness. The lightning grows less frequent. The ash becomes soil, and from that soil, the first green tendril stretches upward again toward the sky that once burned it. That is the quiet truth of memory. It does not resist pain. It holds it until it softens, and yet If even the clouds have tasted fire, what else might linger in the rain we call cleansing, but which still carries the smoke of long ago? And after the clouds had tasted fire, after the sky dimmed and cleared, there came stillness, not peace, but something quieter, something slower than wind, heavier than ash. The storms withdrew, the rain fell silent, and the earth simply paused. It was not an ending, nor was it a beginning. It was the space between, a hush that stretched across centuries, as if the planet itself had drawn in breath and chosen not to release it. Forests did not grow, but they did not die. They simply held their shape, bare-branched under silver skies, waiting. Rivers slowed to a crawl, their surfaces smooth as glass, mirroring a sky too tired to grieve. And underground, the aquifers settled. No flood, no thirst, only the still pressure of memory resting beneath stone. This was the silence between storms, the long moment when nothing moves, and yet everything is listening. Even the soil knew it. Seeds, dormant for decades, remained curled in their husks, not dead, just uncertain, waiting for the right breath, the right softness in the air, the return of the rhythm. Above, clouds wandered without purpose. They hung low, but never cried. They carried the weight of moisture, but refused release. It was as if the sky, too, was remembering how to feel. We rarely speak of these silences. We name the floods. We measure the droughts. We etch into stone the moments of disaster or bloom. But the in-between, we skip over it. And yet, it is here that the earth becomes aware, not in its movements, but in its stillness. The crust settled. Tectonic plates, momentarily aligned, slept like stone lungs beneath continents. No rift widened, no mountain rose, and life, sensing this pause, held itself back. Animals nested in silence. Algae grew in slow spirals, unhurried by sun. Even the wind seemed to forget its path. Time continued. But softly, we think of silence as absence. But this was fullness, like the hush in a cave before the first drop falls, like the weight in the air before lightning breathes, a kind of sacred patience. The earth does not rush between eras, it lingers. And in that lingering, new possibilities begin to form, not loudly, not visibly, but as chemical hints, as shifts in isotope, as patterns rewriting themselves within the waiting dark. Even we, when we pause, can feel it, the breath held too long, the heart slowing beneath still skies, the quiet that doesn't press in but expands outward, making room for whatever may come next. Perhaps that is what this silence was, a preparation, a soft blank canvas stretched over centuries, a rest note in the symphony of time. Eventually the rain would return. It always does. It would tap again on the stones, wake the seeds, pull rivers from their stillness. But for now, nothing moved, and that nothingness was everything. We are taught to look for meaning in noise, in change, in rising and falling. But the earth knows sometimes the most important moments are those that refuse motion, where absence speaks, where the storm has passed, and the next has not yet begun. And yet, if even the rain must rest, what hidden worlds might awaken in the silence it leaves behind? And from the silence between storms, where breath held the weight of waiting, some rains did not return to the sky. They went deeper, not in retreat, but in surrender. Beneath the softened crust, beneath the plates that slid like continents in thought, the rain was drawn down, drop by drop, into the folds of the earth's slow sleep. It did not fall with force. It seeped through fractured basalt, through cracks in ancient oceanic floors, carried not by river, but by gravity and pressure, subducted, pulled into the throat of the planet. Here, in the shadowed trenches where tectonic plates met, the water disappeared into silence hot enough to melt stone. But it was not destroyed. nothing ever truly is. Instead, the rain transformed, trapped within minerals, bonded to serpentine rock. It waited, no longer liquid, no longer free, but held, and as the plates slid beneath one another, slow as drifting sleep, the rain went with them, carried miles beneath the surface, through the mantle's blurred language, into darkness, so complete, no time could be measured. This was not a grave, it was gestation, because within the crushing heat, within the pressure that folded stone like cloth, the water remembered movement. It whispered into the mantle, stirring the chemistry of molten rock, lowering melting points, changing densities, making magma. Rain became fire, and fire rose. Centuries later, maybe longer, the subducted water returned, not as droplets, but as steam, as pressure, as release, through volcanic sighs and geysers that screamed at the sky. The rain came back, carried in ash clouds, laced through obsidian flows, exhaled from the mouths of mountains that had never seen the sea. What began as a quiet storm now became eruption, and even in that violence, there was memory. The isotopes told us we traced deuterium and oxygen-18 through crystals born in lava. We found the fingerprints of oceans in the breath of fire. The rain had not been forgotten, only hidden, rewritten. This is the secret the planet keeps, that nothing ends. It only deepens. Even water, soft and formless, can be pressed into stone and rise again as light and heat. We often imagine the rain's journey as surface-bound, cloud to soil to river to sea to sky again. But the cycle is not only circular, it is vertical. It descends, it dives into tectonic trenches, it lives within the bones of the earth. And in doing so, it shapes continents, because subducted rain drives plate tectonic. It weakens the rocks it enters. It changes the way the mantle moves. Without it, mountains wouldn't rise, continents wouldn't drift, volcanoes wouldn't breathe. So we see now, even the quietest rains can become catalysts for planetary change, and when they return, not as water, but as vapor torn from stone, they bring with them the taste of ages, falling again as acid-laced rain, or crystallized in ash, or simply rising in the shimmer above a steaming crater, and the cycle begins again, but deeper, slower, carved into the memory of magma. So the next time it rains and the drops tap against your window in the hush of evening, consider this. Some of that water may have slept beneath the crust, may have boiled through volcanic veins, may have circled through the lungs of mountains before returning to kiss the world again. And yet, if even rain can vanish into the earth's deepest folds, what other memories might be rising in the steam, carried upward in silence, ready to fall once more? And from the rising steam of subducted rain, from the volcanic breath that carried oceans back into the air, there came once more silence. But this time it was not the stillness of absence, it was the calm that follows surrender. A hush stretched over the earth like a blanket, warm with the memory of fire. The rains fell gently then, lighter, fewer, as if the sky had grown tired of weeping, or perhaps it knew that the season was ending. And somewhere across the curved shoulder of a cooling continent, a crater waited. It had once been impact, a wound carved by stone from the heavens, or the shatter of volcanic collapse. No one remained to say, but the earth had not closed it. Instead it left the basin open, as if knowing it would one day be needed again. The final rains of the age found it. Drop by drop they slid down ancient slopes and collected in the hollow like breath gathering in a cupped hand. It was the last rainfall, the last true storm before a drought that would stretch longer than the memory of trees. But in this one place the water remained. The crater became a lake. Its surface, still and reflective, held the echo of clouds now fading from the world. Its walls, steep and silent, guarded it from the winds of change. And within life stirred, not in noise, not in burst, but in green, Algae bloomed like thought across the water. Filaments swayed in warmth. Simple photosynthesis, turning light into breath. There were no predators, no storms to churn the depths. Only time and a stillness that allowed life to remember itself. We do not know how long the lake held. Perhaps only decades, perhaps millennia. But for that span, within that crater, the earth forgot what it had feared, forgot the fire, forgot the drought, forgot the winds that carried dust and the rains that boiled on stone. In its place, balance. A single held breath in the planet's long exhale. Sediments gathered at the bottom, soft and fine as ash. Each layer, a record, a memory tucked into the bed like pages pressed beneath a sleeping hand. Scientists would one day read them, diatoms fossilized in stillness, chemical shifts in nitrogen and carbon, proof of warmth, of bloom, of pause. But long before that, the crater held its story alone. It did not ask to be remembered. It only received, and in receiving, it healed. Not everything that breaks stays broken. Not every impact ends in scar. Some become sanctuaries. We think of craters as destruction, but they are also collection of water, of light, of time. The lake eventually faded, evaporated, or filled with dust, or drained back into fault lines when the ground shifted once more, but its echo remained in pollen records. In the fine layer of green clay pressed between epochs, a soft green silence holding the shape of rain. And so we learn, even the end of a storm can leave behind a garden, even the final drop can bloom. There is always one place where memory lingers a little longer, where life pauses before the turn. The crater did not need to last, only long enough. Long enough for the earth to begin again from stillness. And yet, if even the last drop can bloom before it fades, what other sanctuaries might be waiting, hidden in the hollow places, ready to remember for us? And when the lake in the crater finally stilled, when the last algae dimmed beneath a thickening sky, time pressed onward, not in speed, but in sediment. The world did not erupt, nor did it rest. Instead, it began to layer itself, one hush atop another, one thin veil of memory upon the next. And between those layers, fragments of something burned, sky ash, paler horizons, they call them now, lines of soot and carbon drawn in the cross-section of stone like a forgotten script on the earth's own parchment. Each horizon a sentence, a pause, a reminder. This was where something ended, not always in fire, sometimes in silence, but always something ended. Ash from ancient wildfires, cast across the sky and rained down into rivers, lakes, open plains, microscopic charcoal, light as breath, settled with the dust and waited. We find it now buried between shale and limestone, between sand and silt, dark lines only a few millimeters thick, that speak of stories longer than any written word. Here is a forest that burned before mammals. Here is a grassland that fed no one. Here is an age that disappeared in smoke. Some lines come from lightning-struck trees, some from volcanoes, sighing black into the sky, and some perhaps from the fires of our own forgotten kind. But always, after the burning, the rain returned. It did not erase, it recorded. The rain inscribed its elegy drop by drop into the softened ground, carrying soot into deltas, pooling it in craters, pressing it into clay, a wet ink on the planet's turning pages. And the earth, ever patient, let it dry. Stratigraphy tells us this. The deeper we dig, the more clearly the soot speaks. Carbon particles shaped by combustion trapped in minerals that once breathed air, isotopes that shift just slightly at the moment. The trees go dark, we can read it, but the planet never stopped remembering it, because each line of ash is not just a scar, it is a horizon, a threshold between one age and the next, and every threshold carries both grief and renewal. The fires may have ended a chapter, but the ash made the soil richer, from darkness growth, from burning rebalancing. The earth does not label tragedy, it integrates. Charcoal feeds the roots of new forests. Nutrients trapped in soot nourish algae in reborn lakes. Even extinction makes room. And so the rain continued. After each fire, after each breath of ash, falling through skies still tinged with smoke, still glowing faintly orange in the upper light. It landed not in purity, but in mourning. And in mourning, it carried meaning. Over time, these paleo horizons accumulated, layer after layer, like punctuation across a long sentence. We're still learning how to read, and in them, we see the truth of cycles, that nothing ends cleanly, that every fire is followed by flood, and every silence by bloom. Even today, beneath modern fields and ancient cities, these horizons lie hidden, testimonies in shadow. We walk above them, we build upon them, but the ash remains, waiting, not to warn, not to punish, only to remind that we have always come through fire, and that the rain, no matter how soft, never forgets what it fell upon. The soot becomes part of the rhythm. The clay holds it like breath, and from that union, time continues, measured not in centuries, but in layers, written not in words, but in particles. And yet, if even the ash of vanished fires can leave a line in stone, what elegies might still be forming in the sky above us, written in rain we have yet to feel. And after the paleohorizons settled, after the last ash fell quiet into the folds of clay, night arrived, not as evening but as an era, a night so deep, even the tides hesitated. The moon, still there in orbit, seemed lost behind a veil of vapor and time, its pull forgotten, its light withheld. The ocean did not rise, nor fall. It only waited, lapping the shore in uncertainty, as if listening for something it could no longer feel. And the shore was dark, not with shadow, but with unknowing, a coastline left untouched by reflection. But even then, even in that long lunar silence, the rain came. It did not bring thunder. It did not disturb. It arrived with reverence, falling softly onto the motionless sea. It drew circles across the surface, ripples that spread like memory, mapping invisible stars onto the water's skin. There were no constellations to guide it, no light to catch its fall, and yet it fell anyway, because rain does not need permission, only gravity, only longing. And in this longing, the sea remembered how to move tiny pulses, tremors. A breath returned to still water, as if the raindrops were whispering, reminding the tide of a rhythm older than light. In the absence of moon there was no tide chart, no clock of salt, but the earth remembered, and the sky through rain wrote it back. Each droplet a signal, each splash a syllable in the slow reawakening of pull. And beneath that water, in the hush of benthic darkness, creatures stirred, not in panic, in rhythm. They felt the tremble, the soft weight of falling, and they moved in spirals, tracing forgotten orbits in the silty black. Even plankton bloom in response to sound. Even coral polyps open to soft pressure. And so, in the rain's descent, life shifted, very slightly toward memory. The shore too responded. Sand drank the rain. Shells shimmered in the briefest reflections. Pools formed in low places where night had folded the beach. These pools were not mirrors. They were maps, maps of darkness, dotted by drops traced by tiny bubbles, and the flicker of unseen life. Above, the sky never cleared. But the rain fell with such quiet persistence that even the stars seemed to shimmer through it, not in light, but in rhythm. We imagine celestial order as light-based sun, moon, reflection, shadow, but there are other kinds of order. Those held in gravity, in vibration, in water. Raindrops fell onto the moonless shore like forgotten clocks, resetting time not in seconds but in waves. It was not the return of the moon that restored the tides. It was the rain that remembered where they had been. And so the sea began to breathe again, slowly, shallowly. A small rise, a tentative retreat, not pulled, but persuaded. The memory of the moon restored by water's insistence. That is what rain does, even in darkness. It remembers forward. It touches places that have gone still and calls them back into motion. And when dawn did finally arrive, not with blaze, but with grey quiet, the tide had returned. The shoreline bore its marks, not in flood but in presence. The wet trace along stone, the new shells on sand, the foam laced with fallen starlight. The moon had never left, only hidden, only waited. But the rain had held the rhythm when all else forgot. And yet, if raindrops can stir the tide without light, what other forgotten forces might still be guiding us, quietly, from beneath the clouds? And after the rain stirred the tides beneath a moonless sky, after the sea remembered how to breathe again, the rivers continued their work, quiet, tireless, unaware. They moved not for history but for gravity. And in their beds, along bends where the currents slowed to whisper, something new was settling. Or rather, something old, pretending still to be new. Silicon. Circuits. Traces of code etched into boards now softened by silt and time. The technofossils, once sharp, once prized, now dulled by years of water's touch. They had fallen into the rivers as debris, as accident, as aftermath. Devices lost in floods, dropped from bridges, or discarded at the edge of cities that no longer called themselves cities. Plastic shells crumbled under UV, glass screens cracked like glacial ice, but the silicon remained fragments of motherboards, microchips wrapped in rust. At first the river resisted them. It pushed them aside, caught them on stones, buried them beneath gravel bars. But water knows only patience, and over time the sharp edges rounded, the printed circuits wore thin, logos faded, letters dissolved into unreadable patterns, until what remained looked almost like stone, just another pebble in a bed of 1,000 others, but different, strangely regular, artificial in its silence. The river did not care. It flowed just the same over trilobite fossils and shattered satellites. It read none of it, only carried, and still the technofossils accumulated. They gathered in the slow corners, the oxbows, the muddy inlets, the delta mouths where current let go. Among shells and driftwood, they settled, some layered among old bones, some pressed into ancient clay that had once held the tracks of dinosaurs. The sediment did not discriminate, it archived everything. And so the past met the recent, stone pressed against silicon, bone against broken screen. Once someone had stored time in those machines. Memories, photos, the rush of 1,000 hours typed into data. But here in the streambed, none of it stirred. No light blinked, no code woke, only silence. The data remained, in fragments too small to call whole. Not erased, but scattered, and scattered things become something else. They become memory, not as retrieval, but as texture, a grain of copper, a thread of fibre, a sliver of ceramic that once held a signal. Now all of it was sediment. Riverbed, geology in waiting. And as new rains came, as floods pressed fresh layers atop these relics, the process deepened, minerals filled the empty spaces. Iron bonded to plastic, quartz grew where heat had once pulsed. Fossilization, not of life but of intention, of the human hand rendered obsolete by its own haste. These were not relics of invention, but of forgetting, of progress too fast to carry. The river carried it anyway, and perhaps, in some distant future, someone or something will split open this sediment and find these shapes. They will wonder, not at what they were, but at why they were made to be lost. why we built so much to last so little, why we carved our thoughts into silicon and let the river take them. They may call them fossils, but they will not know what they stored, only that they were placed beside bones, beside shells, beneath water. The stream bed does not ask what it holds. It only holds, and in its darkness, in its hush of silt and slow erosion, a new kind of archive forms, not of knowledge, but of presence. The simple fact that we were here, that we built things which outlived our names, but not the current. And so the river continues. It carries bone and bite, mineral and memory, not as categories, but as one long sediment of time. And yet, if even our technology can settle like stone beneath water, what else might be waiting in the current, slowly turning to memory, as the river forgets the hands that shaped it, and beneath the stream beds, laced with silicon ghosts, beneath rivers carrying the softened remains of bone and bite, there stirred a deeper remembering, not one of technology, not even of life, but of the planet itself in its first sorrow, because before there were fossils, before forests rose, before breath ever fogged a mirror, there was only heat, magma, fissures, firelight without air. The earth had no skin, only wounds, no sky, only vapor, and yet from that molten hum came something unexpected, a softness, water, born not from oceans but from the planet's own breath, steam rising from volcanic mouths, hydrogen and oxygen married in darkness, the great exhale of a world forming its lungs. Rain fell before rivers had names, before names existed at all. It struck basalt and glass, hissed into silence, cooled the skin of a world that hadn't yet finished becoming. The earth cried itself into shape, not in grief, but in transformation. The first storms were not gentle. They were primal, torrents drenching naked rock, turning lava fields into mud plains, sculpting from chaos the earliest hints of valley and hill. The crust, soft and unsure, shivered beneath each fall. Craters filled, basins deepened, oceans, still nameless, began to gather. And in this falling, the atmosphere cleared, sky took form, clouds found their cycles. The rain wrote the first sentences in erosion and sediment. This was not memory yet. It was prelude. But even then, the story had begun. Each droplet shaped the planet's surface, smoothed its scars, etched the first lines of geography. Vapor became valley, mist became mountain shadow. The soft weight of falling water began to teach the earth how to hold life. Because water is not just a solvent, it is an invitation. It seeps, it connects, it lingers, and from the puddles of these ancient rains, life would one day rise, but not yet. For now the world was still wet with remembering. The crust cooled, the mantle churned, continents drifted like sleepwalkers beneath clouds, heavy with unspent storms. We often think of Earth's birth as violent. And it was, but it was also tender. It had to be, because no life blooms from fire alone. Something had to soften, to cool, to fall from the sky like patience. And so rain fell for millions of years, until the steam thinned, until the oceans mirrored the sky, until silence stretched long enough for the first cells to divide. In this way the earth wept itself into possibility. Its earliest act of creation was not tectonic, but tearful, and even now traces of that origin remain, in ancient zircons that hold hydrogen from first rains, in isotopic whispers, trapped in ocean crust, in the pH of deep aquifers that remember the earliest sighs of cooling rock. The planet is still writing, still raining. Each storm carries forward a thread of that first softness. Each drop is a continuation of the world's earliest poem, a poem written in erosion, in sediment, in salt. And we, brief and blinking as we are, walk upon its stanzas, drink from its verses, forget then remember, then forget again. But the planet never forgets. It continues to weep, to shape, to smooth, to speak through water. It is still becoming, and yet, if the earth once cried itself into being, what dreams might still be forming in the rain we have not yet felt? And downstream from the technofossils, past the river's slow drift of silicon and softened wire, the rain began to tell older stories again, not with words but with atoms. Because even water remembers, not as memory wrapped in image or idea, but as chemistry, as isotope, as ratio written in the invisible ink of time. Every droplet that fell carried with it a fingerprint, a record of the sky from which it came. In the cold seasons, that fingerprint changed. Hydrogen grew lighter, oxygen shifted, the molecules froze more quickly, formed crystals that drifted through glacial air. When the snow fell, it wasn't just frozen water, it was a diary, a chemical sketch of the climate that birthed it. And when it melted, years or millennia later, those same isotopes flowed into rivers, seeped into aquifers, rested in lakes, telling of a time when the air was sharper and the sun dimmed behind long-forgotten seasons. Scientists now read these signals like archaeologists of atmosphere. They drill cores deep into ice caps and sediment, extracting slender columns of frozen breath, each ring a forgotten rainfall, each bubble a trapped whisper of sky. In these layers you can find the shape of ancient winters, you can trace the breath of volcanoes, you can see the quiet sigh of oceans as they cooled or warmed, rising and falling in response. You can even see humanity, our coal, our carbon, our exhaust etched into the isotopic curve like a signature we cannot erase. And yet, long before we measured it, the Earth was already recording, in limestone, in stalactites, in the shells of creatures who filtered their skeletons from ancient sea. Oxygen, 18, deuterium, ratios shifting with the rhythm of time. The planet was never static. It breathed through water, and water, in turn, held every season like a secret. Sometimes you'll find these signatures in puddles on cracked stone, rainfall trapped in a hollow that evaporates before morning. And yet even there, in that brief shimmer of presence, the chemistry remains. The sky leaves its trace. A storm is not just weather, it is context. It tells us where the jet stream wandered, how the oceans stirred, how the clouds were fed. In each droplet, a climate, a mood, a moment, and over millions of years, these accumulate, forming patterns, cycles, warnings. The Earth remembers its warmth. It remembers the Great Freeze. It remembers when deserts were seabeds and glaciers roamed where forests now stand. All of it held in the mathematics of falling rain. And so we listen, with mass spectrometers instead of ears, with isotope maps instead of language. But it is listening all the same, because somewhere between the charcoal and the clay, between drought and deluge, the rain keeps whispering. I was there when the mammoths wandered, when ferns turned to coal, when the forests breathed differently, and the stars felt closer. The rain was always falling, always changing, always dissolving, and reforming, like the memory of a dream just past waking. Even now, as we chart the climate and mark each rising line, we are not discovering something new. We are remembering what the Earth has always known, that nothing stands still, that every season is temporary, that even the skies must change their mind. And yet, if each raindrop carries the chemistry of forgotten seasons, what warnings might already be falling around us, unreared, but dissolving into the roots beneath our feet? And from the isotopic breath of vanished seasons, from the rain that carried time in molecules, there came stillness again, but not silence. This time the quiet had shape. It lay across the water in the cradle of a lake untouched for ages, a lake that did not ripple with wind, a lake that had forgotten how to overflow, a lake that dreamed but never spoke. Its surface, smooth as ancient glass, held the sky in memory, not the sky above it now, but the one it had once known centuries before, when the air was thicker with vapor and clouds moved like slow thoughts across a younger world. Those clouds no longer floated overhead. They had long dissolved, long been reshaped by warmth and wind, but the lake still held them, not in vapor, but in reflection, in the shifting shimmer across its surface at dusk, in the color of dawnlight, held just a beat too long, in the strange way starlight trembled on moonless nights, as if being remembered rather than seen. This was a lake that had learned how to dream upward. Its stillness was not absence. It was attention. Beneath the surface, sediments settled like layered thoughts. Each year brought a new thin veil of memory, microscopic pollen, ashes from distant fires, invisible signatures of seasons pressed into the soft bed like unspoken sentences. And through that slow accumulation, the lake became an archive, a mirror not just of light, but of history. The clouds it remembered were not just vapor, they were carriers of change. They once brought rain heavy with volcanic soot, rain that darkened the lake, then fed it. They once cast shadows of migrating birds whose wings would never return. The lake saw all this, held it, because lakes do not rush, they receive, and in that receiving they become vast, not in size, but in depth. Even now, scientists core into these waters to read the stories beneath. They pull up cylinders of dark mud and slice through time, finding diatoms, finding isotopic drift, finding echoes, layers of drought, flares of algal bloom, traces of far-off forests that no longer exist. The lake keeps it all, and above the modern sky rolls on, mostly unaware. But sometimes, just sometimes, the clouds pause, and their shapes align with those that once were, and the lake stirs. A ripple, a glimmer, as if recognizing a piece of itself in the sky again. We often think of lakes as below, submissive, silent, but some lakes look upward, not just with surface, but with memory, and in their dreaming they remind the atmosphere of what it once was. Because water is not passive. It reflects but also holds. It answers light with motion. It answers time with clarity. The lake had no voice, but it did not need one. Its language was circular, a ring of wind, a widening ripple. The arc of sediment laid down each spring like a repeated stanza, and though no one listened for it, the lake sang. It sang of skies lost to warming, of clouds that no longer form, of birds that no longer return. But it also sang of the patience to remember, of the resilience that still water knows. Not everything is lost. Some of it is simply sleeping beneath reflection. And so, the lake dreamed, not of the world it had, but of the one it still hoped to mirror again. And yet, if even a silent lake can remember the sky, what else might be dreaming beneath us still, waiting for the clouds to return in kind? And when the lake held the memory of a vanished sky, when its still waters shimmered with reflections long gone, the rain found its way onward, downward, into silence carved by time. It followed gravity into the bones of the land, into chasms so wide, so hollow. They remembered sound itself, canyons, not mere wounds, but instruments, hollowed by ages, tuned by erosion. Here the rain did not fall as it once had, soft upon leaf or pooled in soil, but struck stone and sang. If you listened slowly, you could hear it, a syllable of thunder caught between walls, a whisper in the runoff that traced its fingers along shale. The rain spoke in echoes. It spoke in the vowels of vastness, the open sounds of wide stone mouths, of sky reflected in slick canyon floors, and stone, always listening, replied in rhythm. Each layer of sediment, each band of red or ochre or slate, held a resonance, a moment when rain once struck and left behind, not just water but memory. These strata were not just colours, they were chapters, vowels carved in sandstone, pauses embedded in limestone, consonants washed away like sharp edges smoothed over time. Because in this language, some syllables are kept, and some are surrendered. The canyon does not speak quickly. Its grammar is erosion. Its punctuation is collapse. But it speaks, and rain is its reader. Each storm that enters learns to move with the walls. Sound bounces between them, once, twice, then fades into the canyon's slow breath, and yet the rock never forgets the voice. Petroglyphs etched by wind, not hand, grooves from flash floods that roared and vanished before names were ever spoken. The canyon carries those echoes, sometimes holding them in overhangs where swallows now nest, sometimes deep below in chambers no longer wet, but still ringing in the hush between drips. You can feel the weight of stories, tales told in collapse, verses buried in scree. Even the silence here is shaped by storms, and when the sun returns and the walls begin to steam, you can hear a different echo, a kind of breath as water seeps from hidden seams and falls again, slow as thought, onto stone. Each drop becomes a note, each note a call across the canyon to a time when the world spoke in flood, and above, where cliff meets sky, the last traces of cloud disperse without voice. But down here, in the cleft of Earth's great memory, the rain still lingers, still shapes, still speaks, not to be understood but to be felt, because there are languages older than words, languages shaped by gravity, by weather, by silence. The canyon is fluent in them all. We walk its floor, trying to listen, mapping its walls, tracing fossils with fingertips, measuring echo return times with machines. But sometimes, stillness reveals more than study. A moment of quiet beneath an overhang. The wind shifts, the heat wavers, and the walls hum, just briefly, with a sound you didn't know you were waiting for. That is the rain, still speaking, long after the clouds are gone, long after the water has dried, its voice held in the shape of the stone itself. The canyon is not hollow, it is articulate, and yet, if even stone can echo storms long past, what other voices might still be sounding in the places we have mistaken for silence? And beyond the canyons where echoes lingered, beyond the stone vowels and whispered consonants of storms, the rain returned to its quietest work, pooling, not rushing, not carving, but gathering. In hollows, in depressions, in places too low to resist. Here water slowed, it spread into stillness, and in that stillness, things began to disappear, not all at once, not with violence, but with the gentle persistence that only water knows. Where the rain pooled, colours faded, edges softened, outlines dissolved into gradients of memory. It was not the water's fault. It did not mean to erase. It only carried minerals from root to river, silt from mountain to marsh, names from stone to sand. The water held nothing. It simply moved, and in moving, unwrote, scrolls blurred in the flood, paint peeled from canyon walls, footprints in dry dust vanished beneath a single afternoon's downpour. What once stood began to settle, foundations slipped, woods swelled and cracked, walls crumbled not from pressure, but from weight left too long in the presence of water. Because to pull is not to rest, it is to wait, to gather the means of forgetting without intent. Artifacts left too long in the shallows lost their inscriptions. Bones absorbed the silence of silt. Even fossils began to blur, etched by chemical trickles, carrying away the definition of what had once been sharp. Loss here was not decay, it was diffusion. A name dissolved into runoff, a voice softened into echo, a boundary drawn in salt, slowly blurred as the water lapped at its shore. And yet, in that loss, there was a kind of truth, because water never destroys, it redistributes. What leaves the valley feeds the estuary. What washes from the hillside settles in the delta. The shape of water is the shape of what has been surrendered. A stream meanders because it listens. A lake widens because it yields. Even glaciers, solid water, frozen in memory, flow when no one is watching. And all along their edges, things are let go. This is the grief of the world, not shouted, but streamed. The quiet unwinding of detail, the slow drifting of meaning. What mattered slips beneath the surface, and the surface, with its endless motion, does not remember the name of what it carries. But perhaps that is not failure. Perhaps that is how the planet breathes, inhaling with the storm, exhaling with the pooling, creating through structure, releasing through surrender. It is no accident that we are mostly water, no surprise that our tears taste like the sea. We too unripe in grief, in forgetting, in the slow erosion of self over years and storms. But just as water carries away, it also connects. The memory that leaves this place enters another. The loss that falls into the lake feeds the moss on the far shore. We do not vanish. We disperse into air, into river, into time. The shape of loss is the shape of water held too long in one place, and still it moves. And yet, if even rain carries away what we once were, what fragments of us might still be settling in a quiet pool, waiting to be remembered again? And from the quiet pooling of loss, from the soft surrender of shape into movement, the earth turned colder, not suddenly, but with a long, slow breath drawn inward. The warmth withdrew, the clouds thickened, and rain, once fluid and wild, froze in place. It seeped into soil, into moss and peat and lichen-covered stone, and there it waited. In the north, in the shadow of mountains, beneath forests that no longer reached for the sun, the ground stiffened. Layer by layer, the wet earth hardened into memory, permafrost, a frozen archive, a crystal tomb for rainwater, for spores, for breath caught mid-season. It did not shatter, it did not speak, it simply endured. Some of this frost had held for tens of thousands of years, never touched by thaw, locked tight with the chemistry of old summers, of mammoth migrations, of seeds that never broke the surface. Within it, raindrops froze with clarity, tiny prisms sealed beneath loam and time. Trapped alongside them were ancient microbes resting in suspended pores, bacteria curled into dormancy, neither alive nor dead, viruses coiled like forgotten instructions awaiting a single signal, and for a long time, nothing moved. The cold held its breath, the planet slept with one eye open, but sleep cannot last forever. In time the world warmed, by rhythm, by orbit, by the slow swing of solar favor. The ice began to tremble, first in rivulets, then in threads, then in streams that burrowed through their own stillness, seeking sunlight again. And as the frost broke, the rains of ancient epochs rejoined the present, not with thunder, not with drama, with a quiet drip, a soft release of what had once been. These weren't new waters, they were old intentions, returning, and within them, life stirred. Tiny cells, held still for millennia, awoke with the first touch of warmth. They moved, they multiplied, they resumed the sentences they'd begun before the cold. Rebirth, not reincarnation, but rehydration. Because even in ice, some things endure, not all memory dissolves. Some of it only needs thaw. We find this now in cores pulled from the tundra, where ancient DNA lies preserved in silt, in reanimated microbes from soil layers older than civilization. We find pollen, fur, grass stems, whole burrows filled with nests of creatures that never saw our sky, and in each a quiet reminder: time is not a straight line. It loops, it pauses, it stores. The permafrost is not just frozen earth, it is a vault, a deep breath the earth held before it spoke again. And now, as it exhales, we witness its remembering, We watch as thawed water awakens the old codes, genetic, geologic, atmospheric, and we wonder what else might rise with the melt, what ideas sleep in the frost, what colours, what fears. The melting brings more than water. It brings methane, locked in for ages. It brings forgotten bacteria into a world they never evolved for. And yet within that risk there is also resilience, because rebirth is not always bright. Sometimes it arrives slow and muddy, carried in meltwater, nourishing things that waited longer than we can imagine. This is how the planet teaches patience. It shows us that even frozen things can bloom again, that a single thaw can finish a story paused 10,000 years before, and so the water runs again, across softening tundra, through cracks in once constant ice, and with it, the pulse of what was enters what is. The earth is remembering itself through thaw, and yet, if even the frost can cradle life in pause, what other buried moments might return, when the world warms just enough to feel them again, and while the permafrost released its ancient breath, while thawed rains reawakened the slumber of lost seasons. Elsewhere the waters were rising, not from melt alone, but from memory itself, reclaiming what had once been held above the tide. Beneath the river's braided mouth, where silt thickened and reeds swayed in slow water, the delta drowned its past. The temples went first, not in panic, but in slow surrender. 1 century, the foundations cracked. The next, the stone floors began to vanish beneath monsoon. By the time the tide reached the upper tiers, the stairways had already softened, each step rounding at the edges, until direction itself was forgotten. No one returned to sweep the altars. No one lit the fires or climbed the columns. But the temples remained, dreaming. They rested beneath the murky green, their spires cradled by current, their walls wrapped in root and sediment. The carvings faded, but not entirely. A figure still stared out from the silt. A glyph shimmered beneath algae, its meaning lost, but its presence intact. The water did not erase. It held suspended in its slow embrace. The architecture of belief softened, stone grain by grain, into silence. And yet, the floodplain listened. It absorbed the temple's dissolving songs, carried their stories along rivulets into rice fields and mangrove thickets, into the veins of fish and the hunger of reeds. These were not ruins, they were vessels, diffusing their memory into the water, into the soil, into the air. Sometimes when the river dropped after the rains, a corner would emerge, a weathered step, a piece of mosaic pressed with river clay, a whisper of geometry, too perfect to be accident. Fishermen paused, children reached from their boats, scholars took notes no one would read. But the temple never rose again. It had made its choice, to dissolve in place, to linger, not in form, but in presence, because even submerged, meaning remains. The delta changed shape. Channels shifted, islands came and went, but beneath the churn, beneath the flood and the root-braided sediment, the temple still dreamed. It dreamed of footsteps, of echoing voices, of rain that once fell onto polished stone instead of silt-dark water. The rain still fell. It struck the surface with no awareness of what lay beneath, no knowledge of arches swallowed by vines, no comprehension of forgotten gods watching through turbidity. But sometimes it stirred silt, uncovered a face, shifted a stone, and for a moment the temple exhaled. Memory rose in bubbles. Stone sighed beneath pressure, and the floodplain murmured. We think of loss as sudden, but some disappearances take generations. A staircase dissolving is not a collapse. It is a confession that even the sacred will become sediment, that even intention erodes. And yet, not all is lost, because within the floodplains, new life grows. From stone carved for gods, rice takes root, fish feed on what once was altar. Villagers gather water from steps, no longer visible. The temple gives not out of choice but by nature. Even in ruin, it nourishes, and so it dreams still, not of being rebuilt, but of being remembered in the rhythm of rain, in the hush of flowing water. Perhaps the stories are not gone, only distributed, held now in river bends, in monsoon pulses, in the pattern of sediment laid down each season like a new page written over the last, and the earth, forever rewriting, lets it be, because it understands that memory can be spatial and fluid at once, that a temple, even drowned, can remain sacred if the flood carries its voice, and yet, if even the carved stone of temples can dissolve into story, what else might be dreaming through the water, too soft to see, but too old to forget? And after the temples sank beneath the floodplain's hush, after their stories dispersed into river veins and root networks, the sky looked inward again, not with storm nor with drought, but with anticipation, a long inhale, a breath held in the chest of the atmosphere, gathering vapor, pulling warmth, holding still. The world, once so soaked in memory, grew quiet, clouds thick, oceans calmed, and yet every ending is only a curve. All things end, then return. The rains that carved canyons, that fossilized forests, that buried cities and thawed forgotten things, they too must return, not as repetition, but as renewal. They wait now, invisible in the softness between air and altitude, gathering over valleys, warming in oceanic swells, stirring over continents that have forgotten their shape. This is not prophecy, it is pattern. The planet breathes, the sky listens, and the rain prepares. We look for signs, shifts in humidity, movement in jet streams, the rise of a cloud column at dusk. But the real signs are quieter. A silence in the reeds, a pause in the migratory path, a seed staying shut just 1 week longer. The world waits, not fearfully, but knowingly, because it remembers what the rain does. It remembers that water returns to the places that once released it, that every droplet that fell 1,000 years ago may rise again through evaporation, through time. Perhaps the rain will come gently. A soft mist over a fractured desert, a single droplet on a petrified fern. Perhaps it will come in waves, monsoons unrolling across plains like forgotten letters. However it returns, it will carry memory. Rain is not empty. It holds salt, dust, pollen, even traces of distant fires, the chemical script of what has been, and when it falls again, it begins the cycle not from the beginning, but from where we last left it. It picks up the story, continues the paragraph. Perhaps it falls onto stone that once held footsteps. Perhaps it lands in the palm of someone not yet born, but already listening. We think of the future as unknown, but the rain already knows it. It is forming now in the quiet coils of cumulus, in the condensation trails above open sea. It is gathering shape and scent and purpose. Even now, it begins its descent, slow, molecular, inevitable. This is how the earth keeps time, not in clocks, but in rain, not in calendars, but in return. And so somewhere a drought will end, a glacier will sigh, a dormant root will split the soil, and the rain, having wandered for ages, will find home again. We do not need to predict it, only to recognize it when it comes, to listen as it taps on the leaves, the rooftops, the long-forgotten ruins, to feel it in our lungs as the scent of petrichor, that ancient perfume that tells us the earth is turning again toward remembrance. And when it comes, let it carry us forward as it always has. Let it reshape what needs reshaping. Let it blur the boundaries we drew in fear. Let it fill the low places and wash the dust from old eyes, because this is not the end of rain, only its pause, its breath, the inhale before the sky remembers how to weep with purpose. And yet, if the next rain already forms in silence above us, what will it find when it returns? And what stories will it carry forward when it begins to fall once more? And after the long breath of the sky, after the waiting and the gathering and the promise of return, the rain came close, but did not fall, not yet. It lingered in between, not water, not air, but the soft suspension of both mist, a presence without arrival, a memory not quite remembered, but never forgotten. Mist drifted through valleys where rivers once ran, coiled around tree trunks like pale ribbon, folded itself along mountain ridges in the hush before dawn. It did not announce itself. It appeared like a thought unspoken, like the breath of the earth held just behind the lips, and in its stillness, everything waited. Each droplet in the mist was a tiny sphere of time, a suspended moment, a paused descent, formed from moisture, lifted in heat, gathered in chill. It hovered just long enough to feel both the gravity below and the memory above. Mist is not simply water. It is context. It is a vessel that holds stories in suspension. In it float molecules from ancient seas, from forests long burned, from glaciers that once touched the edge of the sky. It carries with it the breath of mammoths, the vapor of vanished rains, the trace of hands that once turned soil beneath forgotten suns. This is the memory held in mist, not linear, not sharp, but diffused. A kind of remembering that doesn't seek clarity, but presence. To stand within mist is to stand inside time. Boundaries vanish. Edges blur. Distance becomes suggestion. You cannot see far, but you can feel depth. You can feel the closeness of what was and what might be. Mist teaches us that memory does not always return as image. Sometimes it comes as atmosphere, a taste, a scent, a softness on the skin. The earth remembers in mist because mist does not demand, it surrounds. It offers. In high forests, leaves drink from mist without waiting for rain. In deserts, creatures draw water from fog drifting over sand. In mines, mist becomes metaphor for loss, for longing, for the things we almost knew. And still it lingers, moving through canyons where rain once echoed, over deltas that hold drowned prayers, across tundra where thawed life wakes again. It drapes the landscape in memory too delicate to settle, too patient to vanish. The mist does not need to fall. It simply is. And yet, even this moment will end. The mist will rise, or condense. It will become rain or return to sky. Its memory will shift shape once more. But while it lingers, we stand inside the pause between stories, a breath between centuries. Not the flood, not the drought, not the silence, but the veil, the place where all things gather before becoming, and in that place we too become still. We listen, we soften, we remember, not through fact, but through feeling, because memory, like mist, rarely descends all at once. It filters in, it folds around us. It arrives when we stop searching. Perhaps the planet knows this. Perhaps this is why it holds so much in mist, the gentle carrier of what cannot yet be spoken. We look up and see only fog, but the air is thick with return. Every droplet a vessel, every wisp a bridge between now and then. And so the journey ends as it began, not with thunder, not with fire, but with water becoming memory, becoming air, becoming rain again. And yet, if even the mist can carry the full weight of time, what pieces of ourselves might still be floating there, weightless, unfinished, waiting to fall?